Do you know what road hypnosis is? The state where your eyes are open, but your brain is half asleep. I've driven 1,000,000 miles, and I thought I knew its signs. But what I saw during Hurricane Helene, that was something else. They told me it was pareidolia, the mind seeing patterns in chaos. A face in the clouds. But the face I saw was looking at me. It was hungry. The choice was simple. Stay on the gridlocked interstate or take a forgotten state road to outrun the storm. I chose the road. Now you listen to what was waiting for me there, and you tell me if a man can go crazy from nothing but rain and exhaustion. All right, get it together, Jack. Just talk. They said it would help. Talk into this thing like you're telling a friend. Like you're on the CB, calling out for a friendly ear in the dark. Only there are no friends on this channel. Not anymore. My name is Jack Carver. For 15 years, I've been a long-haul trucker. 15 years of staring at that dotted yellow line, living off burnt coffee and truck stop chili. I was good at it. Not just driving, but managing the life. The solitude, the schedules, the constant pressure. I thought I'd seen it all. Every kind of blizzard in the Rockies, every dust storm in Texas, every board cop looking to check a logbook. I was wrong. I was so damn wrong. This last run, it started like any other. I was dead heading out of Orlando, picked up a reefer load of frozen shrimp in Tampa. Destination, a distribution center in Memphis. Simple enough. But Hurricane Helene had other plans. She was a Category 4 monster clawing her way up the Gulf, and the whole state was in a panic. The smart move would have been to park the rig, find a motel, and ride it out. But the load was time sensitive, the dispatcher was breathing down my neck, and I had that stupid damn pride. The kind that tells you you're tougher than the weather. I pushed north on I-75, trying to outrun the storm's outer bands. It was like driving through a car wash with the windows down. The rain was coming in sheets, so thick my wipers couldn't keep up. The wind was hitting my Peterbilt like a linebacker, trying to shove 40 tons of steel and shrimp right off the road. Every four-wheeler on the road was either hydroplaning or crawling along at 20 miles an hour with their hazards flashing. It was pure chaos. That's when I saw it the first time. A flash of lightning lit up the whole sky, turning the churning black clouds into a blinding, photographic white for a split second. And in that light, I saw it. It wasn't a cloud formation. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a face, as vast as the horizon, stretched across the storm front. It was pale, gaunt, with cheekbones like jagged rocks and eyes that were just dark, empty hollows. Its mouth was open in a silent, agonizing O. It wasn't angry. It wasn't evil. It was hungry. A look of deep, cosmic starvation. I blinked. I shook my head, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Too much coffee, Jack," I muttered, my voice sounding small and thin against the roar of the storm. "You're seeing things." It had to be pareidolia, the thing where your brain finds patterns in random shapes. A face in the clouds. Everyone sees that. But this felt different. This felt intentional. Like it was looking right at me. Another flash. There was again. Closer this time. More defined. The same empty eyes, the same gaping maw. I felt a cold dread snake its way up my spine, colder than any winter wind. This wasn't the storm. This was something in the storm. Up ahead, the interstate was a parking lot. Red tail lights stretched for miles. An overturned semi, probably jackknifed it from the wind. State troopers were everywhere. I was looking at a 5, maybe 6-hour delay. At least. With Helene breathing down my neck, sitting still was a death sentence. My GPS chirped. A detour. A state road, Route 98, that cut northwest through the Panhandle. It would be 100 miles of Tulane blacktop through swampland and pine forests, but it would bypass the wreck and, according to the map, steer me clear of the hurricane's worst. Company policy is strict. Stick to the major highways. Non santione de routes. But I could hear the dispatcher's voice in my head, could feel the pressure of that perishable load. And I could feel the gaze of that thing in the clouds. I needed to move. I needed to run. So I made a choice. I flipped on my turn signal, eased the big rig into the right lane, and took the exit ramp for Route 98. The sign was old, rusted, half swallowed by kudzu vines. The road beyond, it was a tunnel of darkness, swallowed by the storm. That was the choice that sealed my fate. The choice that turned a 48-hour run into an eternity in hell. I thought I was escaping the hurricane. I wasn't. I was driving right into its heart. Route 98 wasn't a road. It was a scar. A ragged ribbon of asphalt laid over the swamp decades ago and forgotten by God and the Florida Department of Transportation. The Peterbilt groaned in protest, the suspension bucking over potholes big enough to swallow a compact car. Kudzu vines reached out from the shoulders like green, grasping arms, scraping along the side of my trailer with a sound like fingernails on a coffin lid. There were no other lights, no other trucks, no cars, not even a single farmhouse porch light flickering in the distance. The world had been reduced to the 10 feet of flooded blacktop illuminated by my headlights and the suffocating, waterlogged darkness all around. My hands were clamped to the wheel, and I found myself leaning forward, trying to pierce the gloom with sheer willpower. Every nerve was frayed. This was wrong. This was a bad feeling I'd only had a couple of times in my career, usually right before seeing the twisted metal of a wreck materialize out of a fog bank. But this was different. This wasn't a premonition of danger. This was the feeling of being inside it. Then, the lightning flashed again. A brilliant, epileptic strobing that bleached the world white. The face was there. It was no longer on the horizon. It filled the entire sky directly above me, pressing down. I could see details now that made my stomach clench. It wasn't just gaunt. The skin was tight, translucent, like wet parchment stretched over a skull. I could see the faint, dark web of veins underneath. In the eyes, those hollow sockets weren't empty. Deep within them, something swirled. A frantic, chaotic energy, like a swarm of black wasps trapped in two deep wells. The mouth was still open, a perfect O of despair, and with this flash I heard it, or felt it, a low, resonant hum that vibrated right through the truck's frame and into my bones. A sound of immense, unending hunger. No, I said aloud this time, my voice cracking. No, it's the storm. It's stress. It's called auditory pareidolia, or something. Your brain is trying to make sense of the noise. The pressure changes. I was reciting facts I'd read somewhere, clinging to them like a life raft. The face in the clouds was a classic example of pattern recognition, nothing more. My mind, overtired and jacked up on caffeine and adrenaline, was playing tricks on me. That's all it was. It had to be. This road? Of course it was garbage. It was a B road in the middle of a hurricane. What did I expect? The isolation was a good thing. Number four-wheelers to get in my way. My choice to take this route was still the right one. The logical one. Stay on the interstate, and I'd be stuck for hours, the reefer losing temperature, the load spoiling. This was the professional choice. The only choice. I repeated it over and over in my head, a mantra against the growing dread. I am Jack Carver. I'm a professional. This is just a storm. I am in control. My CB radio sat silent on the dash, a comforting green glow. I hadn't heard another soul since I left the interstate. On a night like this, the airwaves should have been crackling with chatter. Drivers warning each other, bitching about the weather, just keeping each other company. Its silence was just another symptom of the storm, I told myself. Too much atmospheric interference. But as I reached out to tap the console, just to feel the solid reality of it, it crackled. Not with a human voice. It was a wet, guttural static. A sound like mud bubbling or something thick and heavy being dragged through gravel. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, then cut out. I froze, my hand hovering over the dash. My blood ran cold. That wasn't interference. That was a sound. A real, organic sound. My meticulously constructed wall of logic began to crumble. That sound wasn't random. It was a prelude. I knew it deep in my gut. I stared at the radio, waiting, my breath held tight in my chest. The speaker crackled again. This time, a voice bled through the static. It was a whisper, dry and raspy, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It sounded ancient, impossibly old, and it spoke only 3 words stretched out into a low, sibilant hiss. The road provides. The road provides. The words hung in the cab, more real and solid than the steering wheel in my hands. They weren't just heard, they were felt. A cold spot formed in the center of my chest, a knot of ice that my own panicked breathing couldn't warm. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated terror. My foot jerked on the accelerator. Who was that? What the hell did that mean? It had to be a prank. Some sick bastard with a powerful transmitter, bouncing a signal off the storm clouds, getting his kicks by spooking truckers stupid enough to be out in this mess. That was the explanation. It had to be. It was the only sane one. Clinging to that thought, I grabbed the CB mic, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "All right, you got me, you son of a bitch." I barked into it, my voice trying for anger but cracking with fear. Real funny. Why don't you get off this channel before I track your signal and shove that mic right up your... The radio cut me off. Not with static this time, but with a sharp, deafening squeal of feedback that made me drop the mic and clap my hands over my ears. It was a physical assault, a high-pitched shriek that vibrated my teeth. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The cab was plunged back into the roar of the storm and my own ragged breathing. The green light on the CB flickered once, twice, and then died. The radio was fried, completely dead. Okay, that's fine. It's old equipment. The storm probably caused a surge. Plausible. Totally plausible. My fortress of logic was now a sandcastle against a rising tide, but I was still inside it. I was still fighting. Then the beeping started. A quiet, insistent beep 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 from my dash. I looked down. It was the reefer unit's temperature alarm. A little red light was flashing next to a digital readout that was climbing steadily. -10 degrees Celsius. -9. -8. My blood turned to ice. That shrimp had to be kept at -18. If it got above -5 for any length of time, the whole load was garbage. A $30,000 loss, and my ass in a sling with the company. No, not now. I pleaded to the empty cab. I pulled the truck over onto the muddy shoulder, the rig leaning precariously. I had to check the reefer unit. Maybe a fuse had blown. Maybe the storm had knocked some debris into the condenser. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and my tire iron. Not for the tires, but for the comforting weight of it in my hand. The second I opened the door, the hurricane tried to rip it from my grasp. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain was a horizontal blast of icy needles. I leaned my whole body into the door to get it shut, then turned to face the 53-foot trailer. The reefer unit was mounted on the front, a hulking diesel-powered refrigerator. I fought my way through the gale, my boots sinking into the muck. The unit's own little engine should have been chugging away, but it was silent. I shined my light on the control panel. The gauges were dead. No power. I checked the fuel tank. It was full. I followed the thick power cables running from the generator to the cooling unit. My light followed their path, and then I saw it. The cables weren't broken. They weren't frayed. They were cut, sliced clean through, as if with a giant, razor-sharp blade. The copper wires inside gleamed wetly in my flashlight beam. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't the storm. This wasn't a malfunction. This was sabotage. But how? When? I hadn't stopped since I got on this road. No one could have gotten to the cables while I was driving at 50 miles an hour. It was impossible. My flashlight beam trembled, dancing over the clean cut. And then I saw something else. On the slick, wet metal of the reefer unit's housing, just below the severed cables, was a mark. It wasn't a scratch or a smudge of grease. It was a symbol, etched or somehow burned into the aluminum. It was a perfect, stark white circle. And inside the circle, a single, vertical black line, like a pupil. An eye, staring out at me from the side of my own truck. I stood there, frozen, rain plastering my hair to my skull, the wail of the wind filling my ears. My CB was dead. My reefer was dead. I was on a deserted road in the middle of a hurricane, miles from anywhere, and someone, or something, was with me. They had been close enough to touch my rig. My phone. I had to call for help. I stumbled back towards the cab, fumbling in my pocket for my cell. My hands were slick with rain, and I almost dropped it. I finally got it out, thumbed the power button, and the screen lit up with 3 terrible words that told me everything I needed to know. No signal. There was no turning back. There was no calling for help. The trap hadn't been the detour. The detour was just the bait. The trap was this road, this storm, this darkness, and it had just slammed shut behind me. No signal, The two words on my phone screen were a death sentence. The illusion of control, of being a competent professional managing a bad situation, shattered into a million pieces. I wasn't managing anything. I was being managed. Hurted. I scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door against the storm, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was breathing hard, a thin, wheezing sound. The tire iron clattered onto the passenger seat, a useless chunk of metal against whatever this was. I sat there, dripping water, the useless phone in my hand. My mind was a racetrack of pure, unadulterated fear. The cut cables, the symbol, the voice on the radio. None of it was random. It was a sequence, a deliberate, calculated series of moves. This wasn't a prankster. This wasn't some random meth head vandal hiding in the swamps. The precision, the timing, it was too perfect. To cut those cables on a moving truck, it defied physics. It defied logic. The road provides, the voice had said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. This road, this Route 98, it wasn't just asphalt and dirt. It was a hunting ground, a territory, and it was providing me to whatever was out there. That's when the new rules started to become clear. Rule 1, I was not in charge. Rule 2, my equipment was useless. My CB, my reefer, my phone, my connections to the outside world, my livelihood had been surgically removed. I was cut off, isolated. Rule 3, the stalker wasn't bound by normal limitations. It could communicate without technology. It could move unseen. It could do the impossible. I had to move. Sitting here was suicide. The reefer load was already a lost cause. Now, it was about saving myself. I fired up the engine, the big Cummins diesel roaring to life like a cornered animal. It was the one thing they hadn't touched, the one piece of power I had left. I wrenched the wheel, swinging the big rig off the muddy shoulder and back onto the flooded road, spitting gravel and mud. I didn't care where the road went anymore. I just had to put distance between me and that spot, between me and that staring, silent, white and black eye. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, a 40-ton beast unleashed. The wipers swiped frantically, barely clearing the wall of water. The world outside was a blurry chaos of darkness and thrashing trees. And then the lightning flashed, a long, rolling, stuttering blast of light that held the world in stark black and white for what felt like an eternity. The face in the sky was gone. For a heartbeat, a wild, insane hope surged in me. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd broken free. But then my eyes were drawn to the road ahead. In the strobing light, I saw them, lining both sides of the road, stretching as far as I could see into the darkness. They were figures, tall, unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still amongst the violently swaying trees. They were shrouded in what looked like dark, wet rags that clung to their skeletal frames. They didn't have faces, just smooth, pale, ovoid shapes where a face should be. They were just standing there, an audience, a silent, waiting gallery. The lightning died, plunging the world back into darkness. But the image was burned onto my retinas. Dozens of them, hundreds, maybe. They weren't a threat. They weren't moving. They were just watching, bearing witness, like pylons marking the boundaries of a racetrack. My racetrack. My breath hitched. My mind, already screaming, found a new, higher pitch of terror. This wasn't a lone stalker. This was organized. This was a congregation, a cult, a welcoming party for the sacrifice the road was providing. The face in the sky wasn't the monster. It was the god. And these things on the roadside, they were its acolytes. A new sound started, cutting through the roar of the engine and the storm. It was coming from outside, from all around. A low, rhythmic chanting. It wasn't in English. The words were guttural, full of hard consonants and long, breathy vowels. It was a sound that scraped at the inside of my skull, a language that felt older than mountains. And with every passing mile, as I sped past more and more of those silent, faceless figures, the chanting grew louder. It was seeping into the cab, vibrating through the floorboards. They weren't just watching. They were praying, or summoning, or consecrating. I looked at my speedometer. I was doing 70 miles an hour on a road that wasn't safe at 30. The truck was hydroplaning, threatening to break loose at any second. I didn't care. But that light, that single, flickering, yellow light was an undeniable beacon. It promised warmth. It promised people. It promised a reality outside the storm and the faceless things in the woods. Hope is a stubborn, stupid bastard, and right then, it was all I had left. The place was a truck stop, or what was left of one. It was an old, dilapidated building with a flat roof and a single diesel pump island under a rusted tin awning. The sign above the door read, "The Eye Opener Cafe and Fuels," but half the letters were missing. The yellow bug light above the door was the only thing lit, casting a sickly, jaundiced glow on the rain-slicked pavement. A single, ancient-looking highway patrol car was parked near the entrance, a Ford Crown Victoria, the kind they hadn't used in 10 years. It was dark, no lights running, but it was there. Law enforcement, an authority figure, a lifeline. My terror was at war with my desperation. The silent figures, the symbol, the sign, everything screamed trap. But what was the alternative? To keep driving down this endless, cursed road until I ran out of fuel or sanity? To just give up and let them have me? No, not yet. I am Jack Carver. I am not prey. Not yet. I needed help. I needed a witness. I needed to tell someone what was happening, even if they thought I was crazy. A cop was my only shot. I pulled the Peterbilt up to the far side of the lot, positioning it so my headlights illuminated the entrance to the cafe and the patrol car. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the drumming of the rain on the roof. I sat for a long minute just watching. Nothing moved. The patrol car remained dark. The cafe door stayed shut. This was it. I had to make a choice. Trust my gut, which was screaming at me to run, or trust the sight of that patrol car, a symbol of order in a world that had gone completely insane. I chose the cop. Grabbing the tire iron again, I took a deep breath and opened the door. The storm hadn't let up. I hunched my shoulders against the wind and made a run for the cafe, my boots splashing through deep puddles. My eyes were locked on that patrol car. As I got closer, I saw details that were off. The tires were bald, cracked with age. There was a fine layer of green mildew in the crevices of the window seals. This car hadn't moved in a long, long time. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I burst through the door of the cafe. A little bell overhead gave a dull, dead jingle. The air inside was thick, smelling of stale coffee, mildew, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet like old pennies. The place was empty. A long formica counter with cracked vinyl stools, a few dusty booths, a silent, dark kitchen in the back. The only light came from the bug zapper humming over the door and the sickly yellow glow from outside. Sitting in one of the booths, facing away from me, was a single person, a man in a state trooper's uniform. It was the same tan and brown uniform they used to wear. His hat was on the table next to an empty coffee mug. He hadn't moved when I came in. He just sat there, staring out the window into the storm. "Officer," I said, my voice hoarse. "Officer, I need help." He didn't turn. He just sat there, perfectly still. I took a step closer, my grip on the tire iron so tight my knuckles ached. "Sir, my truck's been sabotaged. There are people out there, on the road." He finally moved. Slowly, stiffly, he turned his head. The face that looked at me was not what I expected. He was old, his skin as wrinkled and yellowed as a forgotten newspaper. His eyes were milky white with cataracts, and they seemed to look right through me. A thin, unsettling smile played on his lips. "Sabotage, you say?" he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The same damn voice from the CB. My blood froze. "Son, out here, the road provides." He slowly turned his head back to the window. "But you're right about one thing," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are people out there, been waiting for you. The storm brought you. The storm always brings the new blood." My mind reeled. This wasn't an ally. This wasn't help. This was a priest, a gatekeeper. He was one of them. I started backing away, my heart hammering. I had to get out. I had to get back to my truck. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the old trooper said, still not looking at me. His milky eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window, watching my every move. "She doesn't like it when her guests try to leave before the welcome is complete." I didn't know who she was, and I didn't want to find out. I turned and lunged for the door. As my hand touched the grimy handle, the old trooper spoke again, his voice no longer a whisper, but a resonant, booming command that filled the small cafe. "He's running." I threw the door open and looked at my truck. My beautiful, powerful Peterbilt, my only means of escape. And standing beside the driver's side door, holding a thick, rusty chain, was the biggest, ugliest man I had ever seen. He was wearing greasy overalls and a grin that showed more gaps than teeth. And behind him, stepping out from the shadows of the awning, were two more figures in dark, wet rags. The faceless watchers from the roadside. Only these two were moving, and they were coming right for me. My world narrowed to a single, primal imperative: get to the truck. It was 50 yards away, but it might as well have been on the moon. The big man in the overalls, the one with the chain, let out a low, guttural laugh. He wasn't rushing. He just stood there by my driver's side door, slapping the heavy chain into his palm, a jailer waiting for the inmate to tire himself out. The two faceless things, however, were gliding towards me. They didn't run. They moved with a horrifying, unnatural smoothness, like they were being pulled on wires. The old trooper's voice echoed in my head. "He's running." It wasn't a warning, it was a signal. The betrayal was complete and absolute. I had walked into the lion's den and politely introduced myself as dinner. There was no time for finesse. I charged. I ran not at my truck, but at them, roaring a wordless cry of fury and terror. I swung the tire iron in a wide, desperate arc. One of the faceless figures didn't even flinch. It just raised an arm, and the iron bar met its forearm with a sickening, wet crunch. Not the crack of bone, but the sound of hitting a side of beef. The impact shuddered up my arm, but the thing didn't even slow down. It just kept coming. Its partner veered to my left, trying to flank me. I was a bull, and there were the matadors, trying to bleed me out. I abandoned the one I'd hit and dodged, scrambling past the second one, my boots slipping on the slick, greasy pavement. I could feel its cold presence slide past my shoulder, could smell the damp, earthy scent of grave mold that clung to its rags. I was halfway to the truck. The big man, Grinner, was still by the door, watching the show with amusement. He started to slowly unwrap the chain from his hand. He was the final boss. I had to get past the two wraiths first. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They had stopped and turned, and were now gliding after me again, their pace unhurried, relentless. They knew they had me. The whole damn place was a dead end. I spun back around, my eyes fixed on my rig. The engine. I had to get the engine started. It was my only weapon, my only hope. Then I saw it. The passenger door. It was closer, unblocked. I feinted left, then cut hard right, putting all my energy into a desperate, lunging sprint for the passenger side. My lungs burned. The rain was in my eyes, blinding me. I could hear the soft, swift scrape of their feet on the asphalt right behind me. A hand, unnaturally cold, brushed the back of my neck. I screamed a raw, high-pitched sound of pure animal fear and threw myself the last few feet. My hand found the handle. I wrenched it open, tumbled inside, and slammed the door shut just as one of their pale, smooth faces appeared in the window, inches from mine. I scrambled over the center console, past the useless CB, and fell into the driver's seat. My keys, they were still in the ignition. Thank God. Thank God for small miracles. I twisted the key. The engine turned over once, coughed, and died. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I tried again. The starter groaned, a weak, pathetic sound. The battery was dead, or disconnected. It didn't matter. The result was the same. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence inside the cab as the storm raged outside. Thump. A soft, heavy sound against the driver's side window. I looked over. The Grinner was there, his face pressed against the glass, his foul breath fogging it up. He gave me that same gap-toothed smile and held up the end of a thick battery cable, the clamp severed. He'd been busy while I was having my dance with his little friends. He cut me off completely. Then he started wrapping the chain around the side mirror, cinching it tight. He was chaining the door shut, trapping me inside. My truck was no longer my fortress. It was my coffin. I was done. My escape attempt had been a complete, catastrophic failure. I played my only card, and it had been countered with casual, effortless cruelty. I looked out the windshield. The two faceless things were standing in front of the truck now, side by side, their blank heads tilted as if studying me. The old trooper had emerged from the cafe and was slowly making his way over, leaning heavily on a cane I hadn't noticed before. The trap wasn't just this truck stop. It was my own rig. My desperate gamble to get back inside had been the final move of their game, not mine. They hadn't chased me into the truck. They had herded me. The grinner finished with the chain and gave the door a final, rattling tug. Then he walked around to the front of the hood, joining his silent companions. The three of them stood there, staring at me through the rain-streaked glass. The welcome party. The old trooper shuffled up beside them, his milky eyes seeming to bore right into my soul. He raised his hand and pointed a single, gnarled finger right at my face. He opened his mouth, and I could hear his voice even through the glass, a low, triumphant declaration. He's home. Home. The word hung in the air, a final nail in the coffin lid. My truck, my sanctuary for 15 years, was now a cage. An observation tank. I was the specimen, and the welcoming committee was gathered outside for the viewing. The grinner, the two faceless wraiths, and the ancient troopers stood shoulder to shoulder, their forms distorted by the rain running down the windshield. They weren't moving. They weren't trying to break the glass or get in. They were just waiting. Their patience was the most terrifying thing of all. It spoke of absolute certainty. My frantic energy evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy despair that settled in my bones. I was trapped, utterly and completely. Every move I'd made, every decision I thought was my own, had been anticipated. They'd wanted me to take the detour. They wanted me to find the cut cables. They'd wanted me to see the patrol car and run for help. They wanted me to get back in this truck. It was a script, and I was the only actor who didn't know his lines. I slumped back in my seat, the useless tire iron on the floor by my feet. My eyes scanned the cab, looking for something, anything. A weapon, an escape route. There was nothing. The windows were thick, shatter-resistant glass. Even if I could break one, where'd I go? Right back into their arms. The sleeper cab behind me was a dead end. This was it. This was the center of the web. I hadn't found a false sanctuary. I'd been delivered to the slaughterhouse floor. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The only clock was the slow, agonizing crawl of fear up my spine. The four figures outside remained motionless, sentinels in the storm. The hurricane raged, the wind rocking the big rig on its suspension, but inside this little bubble of terror, it was eerily still. My mind started to fray at the edges. I found myself thinking about the shrimp in the trailer. $30,000 worth of frozen seafood, slowly, inexorably thawing in the dark. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. My life was about to end, and I was worried about spoiled crustaceans. Then I noticed something. The old trooper. He was holding his cane, the one I hadn't seen before. But he wasn't leaning on it. He was holding it upright, like a staff of office. And at the top, I could just make out a shape carved into the wood. A perfect circle, with a vertical line inside it. The eye. The same symbol that was burned into my reefer. The same symbol on the Welcome Home sign. It was their mark. Their brand. The Eye Opener Cafe. The name suddenly clicked in my head. A piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. This place, this was their temple. The storm was their ritual. The road was their altar. And I was the sacrifice. The true nature of the cage wasn't just the truck, it was this entire stretch of forgotten highway. A place outside of maps, outside of time, ruled by this thing and its followers. My eyes drifted from the trooper's staff to the cafe. The sickly yellow light still glowed. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see movement inside. A shadow crossing back and forth in front of the light. Another one? How many of them were there? The shadow stopped, and I could see a silhouette in the doorway of the cafe. It was smaller than the others, thinner. It stood for a moment, then stepped out into the rain. It was a woman. She was wearing a simple, dark dress that was instantly plastered to her thin frame. Her long, dark hair was slicked to her head. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, completely unbothered by the gale force winds. She walked past the trooper and his cronies, stopping directly in front of my truck, no more than 5 feet from the grill. And she looked up at me. Her face wasn't faceless like the others. It was pale, gaunt, with cheekbones like jagged rocks and eyes that were just dark, empty hollows. Her mouth was a thin, lipless line. It was the face from the storm. The vast, hungry face from the clouds, now made flesh and blood, standing right in front of me. The goddess had descended from her throne to inspect the offering. She raised a single, pale hand and pressed her palm flat against the windshield. I flinched back, expecting the glass to shatter. But it didn't. Where her palm touched, the condensation on the inside of the glass vanished, leaving a perfect, clear handprint in the fog. Her touch was impossibly cold. I could feel it, a focused point of absolute zero, radiating through the thick glass, chilling the air in the cab. She stared at me through the handprint, her hollow eyes seeming to see not just me, but into me, into my memories, my fears, my dwindling hope. Her thin lips parted, and she spoke a single word, a word that wasn't a sound, but a thought implanted directly into my mind. Mine, mine. The word echoed in the cavern of my skull, a brand seared onto my consciousness. It wasn't a claim. It was a statement of existing fact. The woman, the entity, the goddess of this godforsaken road, held her palm against the glass, and I felt my will to fight just drain away. It flowed out of me like sand from a ripped bag, leaving behind a hollow shell of exhaustion and dread. What was the point? How do you fight a god? How do you fight a storm? She held my gaze for an eternity, her empty sockets pulling at me, promising a peace that was really just annihilation. Then, with the same slow grace, she lowered her hand and turned, walking back towards the cafe. The perfect cold handprint remained on my windshield, a constant reminder of her touch. Her 4 acolytes, the trooper, the grinner, and the 2 faceless wraiths, turned in unison and followed her. They disappeared back into the shadows of the awning, leaving me alone once more. Alone in my cage. The immediate threat was gone, but the certainty of my fate was absolute. This was a psychological game now. They were letting me stew, letting the isolation and exhaustion do their work. And it was working. My body felt like it was filled with lead. Every muscle ached. I hadn't slept in. I couldn't even remember. 24 hours? 36? The adrenaline that had fueled me was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. My eyelids were gritty, heavy things that took a conscious effort to keep open. Sleep. My body screamed for it. Just a few minutes. Just let go. But I knew I couldn't. I knew that sleep was the door they were waiting for me to open. I had to stay awake. I started doing old trucker tricks. I slapped my own face hard. The sting barely registered. I pinched the sensitive skin on the back of my hand until it bruised. I recited the names of every state capital, my voice a dry croak in the silent cab. Albany. Augusta. Annapolis. I kept mixing them up, my brain a fog. The letters swam in front of my eyes. The hum started then, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure in my ears, a thrumming in my chest that matched the rhythm of my own exhausted heart. It was a lullaby, a death lullaby designed to soothe, to quiet, to pull me under. I fought it. I tried to focus on something, anything. I looked at the dashboard, the gauges, the switches, the silent CB. My eyes fell on my logbook, tucked into the side pocket of the door. My meticulously kept record of my life on the road. A life that was over. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy and slow. I opened it, tried to read the neat lines of my own handwriting, but the words were just meaningless squiggles. My head nodded forward. My chin hit my chest, and I jerked awake, a fresh spike of panic clearing the fog for a second. I looked out the windshield. The cold handprint was still there. Had something moved? Was it a shadow by the fuel pumps? Paranoia began to gnaw at me. My exhausted mind was starting to create its own demons, populating the shadows with faceless things and grinning brutes. Were they really gone? Or were they just outside my line of sight, waiting for my eyes to close? I needed fuel. Not for the truck, but for me. I had a half-eaten bag of beef jerky and a warm bottle of water on the passenger floor. It felt like a monumental effort to lean over and grab them. My movements were slow, syrupy. I managed to get the bag. My fingers were too numb and clumsy to tear it open. I tried to use my teeth, growling with frustration like a caged animal. The plastic finally gave way. I chewed on a piece of the tough, salty meat. It tasted like ash. I forced it down, then took a sip of the stale water. It was no good. The brief surge of energy was gone in an instant. The hum was getting louder, more insistent. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached to them. I was losing. The battle was being fought inside my own head, and I was losing. My gaze drifted to the sleeper bunk behind me. The curtain was partially drawn. The small, dark space promised comfort. It promised oblivion. Just for a minute. Just rest my eyes for a minute. What could it hurt? They weren't coming in. They were just waiting. I could just close my eyes for a second. That was the mistake. The critical error born of pure exhaustion. The moment I allowed myself to think it, the fight was over. My head lolled to the side, my cheek pressing against the cool glass of the driver's side window. The world outside blurred. The drumming of the rain, the low hum, they began to fade. And as the darkness finally took me, my last conscious thought was a terrifying realization. The hum wasn't coming from outside. It was the sound of her voice, the face from the storm. She had been whispering to me this whole time, and I had finally listened. I didn't so much fall asleep as I did fall in. The world didn't go black, it turned gray. A thick, soupy twilight world where the edges of my truck cab bled into the storm outside. I was floating in a sea of my own exhaustion, paralyzed, my limbs heavy as concrete. The low, hypnotic hum resolved itself in her whisper, a constant stream of sound that was just on the edge of being words, coiling around me like smoke. I was dreaming, but it wasn't a dream. It was a violation. My mind was no longer my own. She was in here with me, walking through the halls of my memory, her cold touch turning everything it grazed to frost. I saw my first rig, a beat-up old Freightliner, the memory now tainted with the scent of mildew and grave dirt. I saw the face of my dispatcher, his mouth moving, but her sibilant whisper coming out instead. I saw endless miles of highway, the dotted yellow lines now forming into that symbol. The eye, over and over. The road provides, the road provides. I was strapped to the driver's seat, not by chains, but by sheer inertia. I tried to scream, but my throat was packed with mud. I tried to move, but my muscles wouldn't obey. I was a prisoner in my own skull, forced to watch as she rummaged through the private corners of my life, searching for something. And then I was outside the truck. I was standing on the wet asphalt of the Eye Opener Cafe, the cold rain soaking through my clothes, but I couldn't feel it. The 4 acolytes were there, standing in a semicircle around my Peterbilt. The trooper, the grinner, the 2 faceless ones. But they weren't looking at the truck. They were looking at me. Or rather, through me. My dream self was an invisible ghost, a spectator at my own final moments. The cab door of my truck creaked open. The chain was gone. I hadn't heard them take it off. Inside, my own body was slumped over the wheel, fast asleep. The woman with the storm face emerged from the cafe. She glided across the lot, her feet not seeming to touch the ground. She didn't open the passenger door. She simply passed through it, a phantom of smoke and shadow, and coalesced inside the cab next to my sleeping form. The dream version of me, the helpless observer, wanted to scream a warning. Wake up! She's in there! Wake up! But my voice was gone. I could only watch in horror. She leaned over my sleeping body. Her movements were predatory, yet strangely tender. She raised a pale, delicate hand and brushed a strand of wet hair from my forehead. A mother tucking in a child. A spider checking on the fly caught in its web. My sleeping self didn't stir. She was in complete control. Then she leaned in close, her hollow eyes inches from my face. Her lipless mouth opened, wider and wider, unhinging like a snake's. It opened into an impossible abyss, a vortex of shadow, and ancient hunger. No sound came out, but I felt it, the psychic scream of a billion years of starvation. This was it. This was the end. She was going to consume me. My energy, my life, my soul, whatever it was she fed on. I was about to become another ghost haunting this stretch of road, another silent watcher in the woods. This was the bottom. Trapped, helpless, watching my own demise, unable to lift a finger to stop it. The despair was absolute. It was a physical weight, crushing me, extinguishing the last spark of hope. It was over. I had lost. But as her mouth, that gaping portal of nothingness, descended towards my sleeping face, a flicker of light caught my eye. Not from the storm, not from the cafe's bug zapper. It was from inside the cab. On the passenger floor, half kicked under the seat, was my flashlight. The heavy-duty, metal one I'd taken out to check the reefer. In the gloom of the cab, something was reflecting off its lens. A tiny pinprick of light. It was the faint glow from the dashboard's hazard light button, the only light still working. It was red, a single, tiny, defiant point of red light in a world of gray and black. And in that instant, I saw what was next to the flashlight. It was the tire iron, the useless chunk of metal I'd tossed onto the passenger seat and that had fallen to the floor when I'd scrambled over. It was lying there, forgotten. Useless. No, not useless. Her maw was an inch from my face. My sleeping body was about to be erased. But my dream self wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at the tire iron. And I knew, with a sudden, impossible clarity that cut through the despair like a bolt of lightning, that it wasn't useless at all. It was everything. That glint of red light on the tire iron was a spark in a powder keg. It wasn't just a piece of steel. It was a memory, a detail I had logged and forgotten in the flood of sheer terror. When I'd swung it at that first faceless thing outside the cafe, it hadn't just been a wet, fleshy thud. There had been something else. A flicker. For a split second, as the iron bar made contact with its forearm, the thing's shape had wavered like a bad TV signal. A brief flash of static in its form, accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible smell of ozone, like after a lightning strike. At the time, my panicked brain had dismissed it, but now, seeing it again in this horrific, paralyzed dream state, the detail screamed at me. It wasn't the impact that made it flicker. It was the metal, the iron, cold iron, the old stories. The folklore my grandfather used to tell me, tales from the mountains about fey creatures and things that lived in the dark spaces of the world. Their one weakness, their one bane, iron. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't being hunted by a cult, not a human one. Anyway, the trooper, the grinner, the faceless things, they weren't just followers. They were extensions of her, glamours, illusions spun from shadow and belief, given form and substance. But they were fragile. Their physical forms were a lie, held together by her will. And cold iron could disrupt that lie. The woman, the creature, was inches from my sleeping face, her abyss of a mouth about to devour me. But my dream self was no longer paralyzed by despair. The terror was still there, a cold, hard knot in my gut, but it was now overshadowed by something else. A flicker in the dark, a sliver of a chance. My fear was being cooked away, burned down into something hard and dense, cold, desperate resolve. She wasn't a god. She was a parasite. She fed on fear, on despair, on the life force of the travelers she lured onto her road. The storm was her hunting blind, the road her web. She was powerful, ancient, but not invincible. She had rules. She had weaknesses. And I had a tire iron. The connection slammed into place. The cut battery cables. They hadn't just been cut to disable the truck. They were cut with something that wasn't metal. She, or her minions, couldn't handle it. The symbol on the reefer unit wasn't burned in by heat, but by a touch that was the absence of it. A touch so cold it seared the aluminum like a brand. They could manipulate things, create illusions, but direct contact with iron, it short-circuited them. It broke the spell. My dream self roared, a silent, mental scream of defiance. Wake up. The dream shattered. My eyes snapped open. I was in my cab. The air was frigid. The woman was right there, leaning over me, her face a mask of gaunt hunger, her mouth a black hole of nothingness. This was not a dream. This was real. Her psychic whisper was a physical pressure now, crushing me into the seat, holding me down. I could smell her. A scent of damp earth, of wet leaves, of static electricity, and deep, cosmic cold. My body was still paralyzed, pinned by her will. I couldn't move my arms or legs, but my eyes were open, and I was no longer her terrified victim. I knew her secret. My gaze flicked to the passenger floor. The tire iron was there, a foot away, an impossible distance. I focused all my will, all my newfound, desperate rage on my right hand. The paralysis was like trying to move a limb that had fallen asleep, a painful pins and needles resistance that fought me for every millimeter. My fingers twitched. She sensed the change. Her lipless mouth paused its descent. The hollows of her eyes seemed to narrow. The whisper in my mind became a hiss of sharp, angry static. She knew I was awake. She knew I was fighting back. The pressure intensified, trying to crush me, to snuff out the spark of defiance before it could catch fire. Come on, Jack. Come on. I poured every ounce of my being, every memory of sunlight, every drop of defiance I had left into that one simple command. Move. My fingers spasmed, stretching, straining. My arms slid off the center console, my hand dropping down into the dark space of the passenger footwell. I couldn't see it, but I could feel for it. My fingers brushed against the cold, gritty floor mat. Then they touched something else. It was smooth. It was heavy. It was cold. It was iron. The second my fingers touched the tire iron, the world changed. A jolt like grabbing a live wire shot up my arm. The paralysis didn't break, but it fractured. The crushing psychic weight lessened, the whispers in my head turning from a commanding roar to a panicked shriek of static. The iron was an anchor. It was real, and she was not. Her face, inches from mine, recoiled slightly. The expression of placid hunger was gone, replaced by something that looked like surprise, or maybe even fear. The black void of her mouth snapped shut into a thin, bloodless line. She knew what I was holding. My hand closed around the hexagonal shaft of the tool. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. Solid, unyielding, a piece of the real world in this nightmare of illusions. With a surge of pure, primal rage, I ripped my arm up, the muscles screaming in protest. The tire iron felt impossibly heavy, but I swung it. It wasn't a clean swing. It was a clumsy, desperate backhand slash from the floor. But it was enough. The curved, flat end of the lug wrench scraped against her side. The effect was instantaneous and violent. She didn't cry out in pain. She convulsed. Her entire form flickered like a faulty neon sign, strobing between the gaunt woman and a roiling cloud of black smoke and angry, buzzing energy. A high-pitched squeal filled the cab, a sound of feedback and agony that scraped at my ears. Where the iron had touched her, her form dissolved into a shower of black, static-like sparks, and the smell of ozone and burning wires filled the air. She scrambled back, moving with an inhuman speed, and phased right through the passenger door, disappearing into the storm. The pressure was gone. The paralysis shattered. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, my body trembling uncontrollably from the effort. I was alone in the cab, but I wasn't safe. I could feel her fury, a palpable wave of hatred rolling through the storm outside. The game wasn't over. I had just hurt her. I had just made it personal. I didn't have time to think. I had one chance, one small window before she and her minions regrouped and came at me with everything they had. My mind, clear and sharp for the first time in what felt like days, formulated a plan. It wasn't a good plan. It was a crazy, suicidal, long-shot gamble, but was the only one I had. First, power. I scrambled out of the driver's seat, clutching the tire iron like a holy relic, and fumbled for the flashlight. I shone its beam on the floor where I knew the main battery cutoff switch was a safety feature on most rigs. I flipped the heavy-duty lever. Nothing. She or her goons must have disconnected the master cables under the truck. Fine. Plan B. The reefer unit. It had its own diesel engine, its own generator. It was dead, but I knew why. The main power cables had been cut. But there was always a secondary system, a small, independent battery, just for the unit's onboard computer and ignition. It was small, but it might be enough. I kicked at the passenger door. It wouldn't budge. I remembered the grinner, chaining it from the outside. I scrambled over the seats into the sleeper. The emergency exit hatch in the roof. It was my only way out. I unlatched it and pushed. It opened with a groan into the howling wind and rain. I climbed out onto the roof of the cab, the wind threatening to peel me off and send me flying. I clung to the air horn, my knuckles white, the tire iron tucked into my belt. Below me, I could see them reforming. The 4 acolytes, materializing out of the rain and shadows at the front of the truck, their faceless heads turned up towards me. I had to be fast. I half climbed, half slid my way down the back of the cab and onto the catwalk between the cab and the trailer. The reefer unit was right there, a hulking, silent beast. I knew these units like the back of my hand. I ripped open the side maintenance panel, exposing a tangle of wires and hoses. My fingers, numb with cold, found what I was looking for, the small insulated leads to the starter battery. I used the sharpened end of the tire iron to strip the insulation off the wires, exposing the bright copper beneath. This was the crazy part. This was the part that could get me killed. I needed to get that power to the truck's main starter. I uncoiled the heavy jumper cables I kept in the side box, my last remaining piece of useful equipment. I clamped one end onto the exposed reefer battery wires. Then, leaning precariously off the catwalk, I stretched the other end down toward the truck's starter motor, tucked deep in the engine block. It was too far. I was a foot short. The figures below were starting to move, gliding towards the cab. The old trooper pointed his iron-free cane at me, and I felt a wave of dizziness, a touch of that old paralysis trying to reclaim me. I fought it off, shaking my head. I had to connect them. I braced myself, took the heavy metal clamps of the jumper cables in one hand, and leaped. I landed hard on the truck's frame, my boots slipping on the greasy, diesel-soaked steel. The impact jarred my teeth, but I held on. I was stretched out, my left hand clinging to the reefer unit, my right hand holding the jumper cable clamps just inches from the starter. Below me, the grinner reached the cab, his huge hands grabbing for my leg. I kicked out wildly, my boot connecting with his shoulder. There was no substance to him. My foot passed through him as if he were made of smoke, but the contact made his form waver and hiss like water on a hot skillet. They couldn't stand the touch of my steel-toed boots. The trooper chanted, his voice a low drone that made my vision swim. The world started to tilt. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the vertigo, and lunged that final inch. The red clamp connected with the positive terminal on the starter. The black clamp found a grounding point on the engine block. A shower of brilliant blue sparks erupted, and the reefer's small battery screamed in protest, pouring its lifeblood into the massive heart of the Peterbilt. I scrambled back onto the catwalk, then up onto the roof and dropped back down through the hatch into the cab, sealing it behind me. I landed in the driver's seat, grabbing the key. The 4 figures were converging on the front of the truck, their movements no longer calm and patient, but frantic, angry. The woman with the storm face materialized in front of them, her form crackling with black energy, her mouth open in a silent, furious scream. "Come on, baby," I whispered, turning the key. The starter groaned, weak and slow, starved for power. The engine turned once, twice. The woman raised her hands, and the windshield began to crack, spiderwebbing from the cold handprint she'd left behind. A deep, resonant boom shook the truck as the grinner slammed his phantom fists against the driver's side door. "Come on," I roared, holding the key. The engine caught. It coughed, sputtered, and then erupted into a deafening, defiant roar. The cab shuddered with the raw power of the Cummins diesel. The headlights flashed on, illuminating the 5 of them in a brilliant, cleansing glare. They recoiled, shielding their non-faces. The woman shrieked, a sound of pure hatred that I could now hear with my own ears. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gear shift into first, my right hand grabbing the tire iron from the seat beside me. This truck was more than my home. It was a part of me. It was 15 tons of cold, hard American iron, and I was going to use it. I stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, snapping the chain on the driver's door like a piece of thread. The 5 figures scattered. I swung the wheel hard right, aiming not for them, but for the pillars holding up the awning of the Eye Opener Cafe. The front corner of my trailer smashed into the first rust-eaten steel pole. It groaned, bent, and then buckled. I kept pushing, the engine screaming, and the entire tin roof of the awning ripped free from the building and came crashing down on top of the old trooper and one of the faceless things. There was a wet, static crunch, and they dissolved into nothing. I threw the truck into reverse, then charged forward again, this time aiming for the cafe itself. The grinner stood in my way, his arms outstretched, trying to physically stop the rig. The Peterbilt hit him, and for a second he held. The grill buckled, the headlights shattered. But he was illusion, and I was 40 tons of reality. He exploded into a cloud of black dust and rage. The nose of my truck smashed through the front wall of the cafe. Wood splintered, glass shattered. I could see the woman inside, her form flickering wildly, the building itself seeming to crumble around her as its focal point was destroyed. The last faceless one lunged for my passenger window, its ragged arm phasing through the glass. I swung the tire iron, a full, two-handed blow. The iron bar connected with its head, and the thing disintegrated with a final, agonized hiss. I backed out of the wreckage. The cafe was a ruin. The storm above seemed to falter, the wind lessening, the rain thinning. The face in the clouds was contorted in agony, breaking apart. The woman stood in the wreckage, her form unstable, her power broken. She locked her hollow eyes with mine, and I felt one last wave of pure, undiluted hatred. Then she dissolved, not into sparks, but into a fine, gray mist that was carried away on the dying wind. It was over. I sat there, breathing heavily, my hands shaking on the wheel. The silence was absolute. Even a storm had died. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of that cursed place, not looking back. I drove all the way to Memphis, the reefer dead, the load ruined, the front of my truck a twisted wreck. I didn't stop once. I never drove a truck again. I sold the rig for scrap. I couldn't stand to be inside it. Sometimes I still feel that cold spot where she touched the windshield. So that's the story. That's my confession. I don't know what that thing was. A legend, a demon, something that slipped through the cracks. All I know is that there are roads in this country that don't show up on any map. And if you're ever out there driving late at night in a bad storm and your GPS offers you a shortcut, just stay on the interstate. Trust me, some detours you don't come back from. Not all of you anyway. Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button. You never know what's waiting for you out there in the dark.